Alright, make sure this is all working. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Alright. So, part 5 for us. Why are we out of focus today? About time. Hey, Liz. Looks like I got technical difficulties. Let me see. We're a bit fuzzy today, apparently. How's that work? That better? No? Yep. Oh, there we go. Okay. Technical difficulties solved. No. The main technical difficulty was getting the cats out of the room. Because they'll interrupt. So you ready for some more Inquisitor, what's it called? Pussies are always a handful. Inquisitor erotica. I guess we'll call it that. Chapter 11. Of the method by which they can inflict every sort of infirmity, generally ills of the graver kind. But there is no bodily infirmity, not even leprosy or epilepsy, which cannot be caused by witches with God's permission. And this is proved by the fact that no sort of infirmity is accepted by the doctors. For a careful consideration of what has already been written concerning the power of devils and wickedness of witches will show that this statement offers no difficulty. Nider also deals with this subject, both in the books of precepts and in his Formicarius, where he asks whether witches can actually injure men by their witchcraft. And the question makes no exception of any infirmity, however incurable. And he there answers that they can do so, and proceeds to ask in what way and by what means. And as to the first, he answers, as has been shown in the first question of the first part of this treatise, and it is proved also by St. Isidore, where he describes the operations of witches, and says that they are called witches on account of the magnitude of their crimes. For they disturb the elements by raising up storms with the help of devils. They confuse the minds of men in the ways already mentioned, by either entirely obstructing or gravely impeding the use of their reason. He adds also that without the use of any poison, but by the mere virulence of their incantations, they can deprive men of their lives. It is proved also by St. Thomas in the second book of Sentences, and in book 4, discussion 34, and in general all the theologians write that witches can, with the help of the devil, bring harm upon men in their affairs, in all the ways in which the devil alone can injure or deceive, namely, in their affairs, their reputation, their body, their reason, and their life, which means that those injuries which are caused by the devil without any witch can also be caused by a witch, and even more readily so, on account of the greater offense which is given to the divine majesty, as has been shown above. In Job 1 and 2 is found a clear case of the injury in temporal affairs. The injury to reputation is shown in the history of the blessed Jerome, that the devil transformed himself into the appearance of Saint Silvanus, Bishop of Nazareth, a friend of Saint Jerome. And this devil approached a noble woman by night in her bed, and began first to provoke and entice her with lewd words, and then invited her to perform the sinful act. And when she called out, the devil in the form of the saintly bishop hid under the woman's bed, and being sought for and found there, he in liquorish language declared lyingly that he was the Bishop Silvanus. On the morrow, therefore, when the devil had disappeared, the holy man was scandalously defamed. But his good name was cleared when the devil confessed at the tomb of St. Jerome that he had done this in an assumed body. The injury to the body is shown in the case of the blessed Job, who was stricken by the devil with terrible sores, which are explained as a form of leprosy. And Sigisbert and Vincent of Beauvaris, Special Histories 2537, both tell that in the time of the Emperor Louis II, in the Diocese of Mainz, a certain devil began to throw stones and to beat at the houses as if with a hammer. And then by public statements and secret insinuations, he spread discord and troubled the minds of many. Then he excited the anger of all against one man, whose lodging, where he was resting, he set on fire, and said that they were all suffering for his sins. So at the last that man had to find his lodging in the fields. And when the priests were saying a litany on this account, the devil stoned many of the people with stones till that he hurt them to bleeding, and sometimes he would desist, and sometimes rage, and this continued for 3 years, until all the houses there were burned down. Example of the injury to the use of the reason, and of the tormenting of the inner perceptions, are seen in those possessed and frenzied men, of whom the Gospels tell. And as for death, and that they deprive some of their lives, it is proved in Tobias 6, in the case of the 7 husbands of the Virgin Sarah, who were killed because of their lecherous lust and unbridled desire for the Virgin Sarah, of whom they were not worthy to be the husbands. Therefore it is concluded that both by themselves, and all the more with the help of witches, devils can injure men in every way without exception. But if it is asked whether injuries of this sort are to be ascribed rather to devils than to witches, it is answered that, when the devils cause injuries by their own direct action, then they are principally to be ascribed to them. But when they work through the agency of witches for the disparagement and offending of God, and the perdition of souls, knowing that by this means God is made more angry and allows them greater power of doing evil, and because they do indeed perpetuate countless witchcrafts which the devil would not be allowed to bring upon men if he wished to injure men alone by himself, but are permitted, in the just and hidden purpose of God, through the agency of witches, on account of their perfidy and abjuration of the Catholic faith. Therefore such injuries are justly ascribed to witches. Secondarily, however, much the devil may be the principal actor. Therefore, when a woman dips a twig in water and sprinkles the water in the air to make it rain, although she does not herself cause the rain, and could not be blamed on that account, yet because she has entered into a pact with the devil by which she can do this, as a witch, although it is the devil who causes the rain, she herself nevertheless deservedly bears the blame, because she is an infidel and does the devil's work, surrendering herself to his service. So also when a witch makes a waxen image or some such thing in order to bewitch somebody, or when an image of someone appears by pouring molten lead into the water, and some injury is done upon the image, such as piercing it or hurting it in any other way, when it is the bewitched man who is in imagination being hurt, although the injury is actually done to the image by some witch or some other man, and the devil in the same manner invisibly injures the bewitched man, yet it is deservedly ascribed to the witch. For without her, God would never allow the devil to inflict the injury, nor would the devil on his own account try to injure the man. But because it has been said that in the matter of their good name the devils can injure men on their own account, and without the cooperation of witches, there may arise a doubt whether the devils cannot also defame honest women, so that they are reputed to be witches, when they appear in their likeness to bewitch someone, from which it would happen that such a woman would be defamed without cause. In answering this, we must premise a few remarks. First, it has been said that the devil can do nothing without the divine permission, as is shown in the first part of this work in the last question. It has also been shown that God does not allow so great power of evil against the just and those who live in grace as against sinners, and as the devils have more power against sinners, see the text, when a strong man armed, etc., so they are permitted by God to afflict them more than the just. Finally, although they can, with God's permission, injure the just in their affairs, their reputation, and their bodily health, Yet because they know that their power is granted them chiefly for the increase of the merits of the just, they are the less eager to injure them. Therefore, it can be said that in this difficulty there are several points to be considered. First, the divine permission. Secondly, the man who is thought to be righteous, for they who are so reputed are not always actually in a state of grace. Thirdly, the crime of which an innocent man would be suspected, for that crime in its very origin exceeds all the crimes of the world. Therefore it is to be said that it is granted that, with God's permission, an innocent person, whether or not he is in a state of grace, may be injured in his affairs to this particular crime, and the gravity of the accusation, for we have often quoted St. Isidore saying that they are called witches from the magnitude of their crimes. It can be said that for an innocent person to be defamed by the devil in a way that has been suggested does not seem at all possible for many reasons. In the first place, it is one thing to be defamed in the respect of vices which are committed without any expressed or tacit contract with the devil, such as theft, robbery, or fornication, but quite another matter to be defamed in respect of vices which it is impossible to accuse a man of having perpetuated unless he has entered upon an expressed contract with the devil. And such are the works of witches which cannot be laid at their door unless it is by the power of devils that they bewitch men, animals, and the fruits of the earth. Therefore, although the devil can blacken men's reputations in respect of other vices, yet it does not seem possible for him to do so in respect of this vice, which cannot be perpetuated without his cooperation. Besides, it has never hitherto been known to have happened that an innocent person has been defamed by the devil to such an extent that he was condemned to death for this particular crime. Furthermore, when a person is only under suspicion, he suffers no punishment except that which the canon prescribes for his purgation, as will be shown in the third part of this work, in the second method of sentencing, which is. And it is set down there that if such a man fails in his purgation, he is to be considered guilty, but that he should be solemnly adjured before the punishment due to his sin is proceeded with and enforced. But here we are dealing with actual events, and it has never yet been known that an innocent person has been punished on suspicion of witchcraft, and there is no doubt that God will never permit such a thing to happen. Besides, he does not suffer the innocent who are under angelic protection to be suspected of smaller crimes, such as robbery and such things. Then all the more will he preserve those who are under that protection from suspicion of the crime of witchcraft. And it is no valid objection to quote the legend of St. Germanius, when devils assumed the bodies of other women and sat down at table and slept with the husbands, deluding the latter into the belief that those women were in their own bodies, eating and drinking with them, as we have mentioned before. For the women in this case are not to be held guiltless, for in the canon, Episcopi 26, question 2, such women are condemned for thinking that they are really and actually transported, when they are so only in imagination, although, as we have shown above, they are at times bodily transported by devils. But our present proposition is that they can, with God's permission, cause all other infirmities with no exception. And it is to be concluded from what we have said that this is so, for no exception is made by the doctors, and there is no reason why there should be any, since, as we have often said, the natural power of devils is superior to all corporeal power. And we have found in our experience that this is true. For although greater difficulty may be felt in believing that witches are able to cause leprosy or epilepsy, since these diseases arise from some long-standing physical predisposition or defect, nonetheless it has sometimes been found that even these have been caused by witchcraft. For in the Diocese of Basel, in the district of Alsace in Lorraine, a certain honest laborer spoke roughly to a certain quarrelsome woman, and she angrily threatened him that she would soon avenge herself on him. He took little notice of her, but on the same night he felt a pustule grow upon his neck, and he rubbed it a little, and found his whole face and neck puffed up and swollen, and a horrible form of leprosy appeared all over his body. He immediately went to his friends for advice and told them of the woman's threat, and said that he would stake his life on the suspicion that this had been done to him by the magic art of that same witch. In short, the woman was taken, questioned, and confessed her crimes, but when the judge asked her particularly about the reason for it and how she had done it, she answered, "When that man used abusive words to me, I was angry and went home, and my familiar began to ask the reason for my ill humor. I told him and begged him to avenge me on the man, and he asked what I wanted him to do to him. And I answered that I wished he would always have a swollen face. And the devil went away and afflicted the man even beyond my asking, for I had not hoped that he would infect him with such sore leprosy. And so the woman was burned." And in the Diocese of Constance, between Breisach and Freiburg, there is a leprous woman, unless she had paid the debt of all the flesh within these 2 years, who used to tell to many people how the same thing had happened to her by reason of a similar quarrel which took place between her and another woman. For one night, when she went out of the house to do something in front of the door, a warm wind came from the house of the other woman, which was opposite, and suddenly struck her face, and from that time she had been afflicted with leprosy, which she now suffered. And lastly, in the same diocese, in the territory of the Black Forest, a witch was being lifted by a gaoler onto the pile of wood prepared for her burning, and she said, "I will pay you," and blew into his face, and he was at once afflicted with a horrible leprosy all over his body, and did not survive many days. For the sake of brevity, the fearful crimes of this witch, and many more instances, could be recounted or omitted, for we have often found that certain people have been visited with epilepsy or the falling sickness by means of eggs which have been buried with dead bodies, especially the dead bodies of witches, together with other ceremonies of which we cannot speak, particularly when these eggs have been given to a person either in food or drink. All right. It was a long section. Chapter 12. Of the way how in particular they afflict men with other like infirmities. But who can reckon the number of infirmities which they have inflicted upon men, such as blindness, the sharpest pains, and contortions of the body? Yet we shall set down a few examples which we have seen with our eyes, or have been related to one of the inquisitors. When an inquisition was being held on some witches in the town of Innsbruck, the following case, among others, was brought to light. A certain honest woman who had been legally married to one of the household of the Archduke formally deposed the following. In the time of her maidenhood, she had been in the service of one of the citizens, whose wife became afflicted with grievous pains in the head. And a woman came who said she could cure her, and so began certain incantations and rites which she said would assuage the pains. And I carefully watched, said this woman, what she did, and saw that, against the nature of water poured into a vase, she caused water to rise in its vessel, together with other ceremonies which there is no need to mention. And considering that the pains in my mistress's head were not assuaged by these means, I addressed the witch in some indignation with these words: "I do not know what you are doing, but whatever it is witchcraft, and you are doing it for your own profit." Then the witch at once replied, "You will know in 3 days whether I am a witch or not." And so it proved, for on the 3rd day, when I sat down and took up a spindle, I suddenly felt a terrible pain in my body. First it was inside me, so that it seemed that there was no part of my body in which I did not feel horrible shooting pains. Then it seemed to me just as if burning coals were being continually heaped upon my head. Thirdly, from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet, there was no place large enough for a pinprick that was not covered with a rash of white pustules. And so I remained in these pains, crying out and wishing only for death, until the 4th day. At last my mistress's husband told me to go to a certain tavern, and with great difficulty I went, whilst he walked before, until we were in front of the tavern. "See," he said to me, "There is a loaf of white bread over the tavern door." "I see," said I. Then he said, "Take it down if you possibly can, for it may do you good." And I, holding on to the door with one hand as much as I could, got hold of the loaf with the other. "Open it," said my master, "and look carefully at what is inside." Then, when I had broken open the loaf, I found many things inside, especially some white grains very like the pustules on my body. And I saw also some seeds and herbs, such as I could not eat or even look at, with the bones of serpents and other animals. In my astonishment, I asked my master what was to be done, and he told me to throw it all into the fire. I did so, and behold, suddenly, not in an hour, or even a few minutes, but at the moment when the matter was thrown into the fire, I regained all my former health. And much more was deposed against the wife of the citizen in whose service this woman had been, by reason of which she was not lightly but very strongly suspected, and especially because she had used great familiarity with known witches. It is presumed that, having knowledge of the spell of witchcraft hidden in the loaf, she had told it to her husband, and then in the way described, the maidservant recovered her health. To bring so great a crime into detestation, it is well that we should tell how another person, also a woman, was bewitched in the same town. An honest married woman deposed the following on oath. "Behind my house," she said, "I have a greenhouse, and my neighbor's garden borders on it. One day I noticed that a passage had been made from my neighbor's garden to my greenhouse, not without some damage being caused. And as I was standing in the door of my greenhouse, reckoning to myself and bemoaning both the passage and the damage, my neighbor suddenly came up and asked if I suspected her. But I was frightened because of her bad reputation, and only answered, 'The footprints on the grass are proof of damage.' Then she was indignant, because I had not, as she hoped, accused her with the actionable words, and went away murmuring, and though I could hear her words, I could not understand them. After a few days I became very ill with pains in the stomach and the sharpest twinges shooting from my left side to my right, and conversely, as if two swords or knives were thrust through my breasts, whence day and night I disturbed all the neighbors with my cries. And when they came from all sides to console me, it happened that a certain clay worker, who was engaged in an adulterous intrigue with the witch, my neighbor, coming to visit me, took pity on my illness, and after a few words of comfort went away. But the next day he returned in a hurry, and after consoling me added, 'I am going to test whether your illness is due to witchcraft, and if I find that it is, I shall restore your health.' So he took some molten lead, and, while I was laying in bed, poured it into a bowl of water, which he placed on my body. And when the lead solidified into a certain image in various shapes, he said, 'See, your illness has been caused by witchcraft, and one of the instruments of that witchcraft is hidden under the threshold of your house door. Let us go, then, and remove it, and you will feel better.' So my husband and he went to remove the charm, and the clay worker, taking up the threshold, told my husband to put his hand into the hold, which then appeared, and take out whatever he found, and he did so. And first he brought out a waxen image, about a palm long, perforated all over, and pierced through the sides with 2 needles, just in the same way that I felt the stabbing pains from side to side, and then little bags containing all sorts of things, such as grains and seeds and bones. And when all these things were burned, I became better, but not entirely well, for although the shootings and twinges stopped, and I quite regained my appetite for food, yet even now I am by no means fully restored to health." And when we asked her why it was that she had not been completely restored, she answered, "There are some other instruments of witchcraft hidden away which I cannot find." And when I asked the man how he knew where the first instruments were hidden, he answered, "I knew this through the love which prompts a friend to tell things to a friend, for your neighbor revealed this to me when she was coaxing me to commit adultery with her." This is the story of the sick woman. But if I were to tell all the instances that were found in that one town, I should need to make a book of them. For countless men and women who were blind, or lame, or withered, or plagued with various infirmities, severally took witches, and that they were bound to endure those ills, either for a period or right up to their deaths. And all that they said and testified was true. either as regards a specified illness or as regards a specified illness or as regards the death of others. For that country abounds in henchmen and knights, who have leisure for vice and seduce women, and then wish to cast them off when they desire to marry an honest woman. But they can rarely do this without incurring the vengeance of some witchcraft upon themselves or their wives. For when those women see themselves despised, they persist in tormenting not so much the husband as the wife, in the fond hope that if the wife should die, the husband would return to his former mistress. For when a cook of the Archduke had married an honest girl from a foreign country, a witch who had been his mistress met them in the public road, and in the hearing of other honest people, foretold the bewitching and death of the girl, stretching out her hand and saying, "Not for long will you rejoice in your husband." And at once, on the following day, she took to her bed, and after a few days paid the debt of all flesh, exclaiming just as she expired, "Lo, thus I die, because that woman, with God's permission, has killed me by her witchcraft. Yet verily I go to another and better marriage with God." In the same way, according to the evidence of public report, a certain soldier was slain by witchcraft, and many others whom I omit to mention. But among them there was a well-known gentleman, whom his mistress wished to come to her on one occasion to pass the night. But he sent his servant to tell her that he could not visit her that night because he was busy. She promptly flew into a rage and said to the servant, "Go and tell your master that he will not trouble me for long." On the very next day he was taken ill, and he was buried within a week. And there are witches who can bewitch their judges by a mere look or glance from their eyes, and publicly boast that they cannot be punished. And when malefactors have been imprisoned for their crimes and exposed to the severest torture to make them tell the truth, these witches can endow them with such an obstinacy of preserving silence that they are unable to lay bare their crimes. And there are some who, in order to accomplish their evil charms and spells, beat and stab the crucifix and utter the filthiest words against the purity of the most glorious Virgin Mary, casting the foulest aspersions on the nativity of our Savior from her inviolate womb. It is not expedient to repeat those vile words, nor yet to describe their detestable crimes, as the narrative will give too great an offense to the ears of the pious. But they are all kept and preserved in writing, detailing the manner in which a certain baptized Jewess had instructed other young girls. And one of them, named Walpurgis, being in the same year at the point of death, and being urged by those who stood round her to confess her sins, exclaimed, "I have given myself body and soul to the devil. There is no hope of forgiveness for me," and so died. These particulars have not been written to the shame, but rather to the praise and glory of the most illustrious Archduke, for he was truly a Catholic prince, and labored very zealously with the church at Brixen to exterminate witches. But they are written rather in hate and loathing of so great a crime, and that men may not cease to avenge their wrongs, and the insults and offenses these wretches offer to the Creator and our holy faith, to say nothing of temporal losses which they cause. For this is the greatest and gravest crime, namely, that they abjure the faith. Yeah. What Catholics actually believe. What? You can still see a lot of this. Chapter 13. How witch midwives commit most horrid crimes when they either kill children or offer them to devils in most accursed wise. We must not omit to mention the injuries done to children by witch midwives, first by killing them, and secondly by blasphemously offering them to devils. In the Diocese of Strasbourg, in the town of Zabern, there is an honest woman very devoted to the Blessed Virgin Mary, who tells the following experience of hers to all the guests that come to the tavern, which she keeps known by the sign of the Black Eagle. "I was," she says, "pregnant by my lawful husband, now dead, and as my time approached, A certain midwife importuned me to engage her to assist at the birth of my child. But I knew her bad reputation, and although I had decided to engage another woman, pretended with conciliatory words to agree to her request. But when the pains came upon me, and I had brought in another midwife, the first one was very angry, and hardly a week later came into my room one night with 2 other women, and approached the bed where I was lying. And when I tried to call my husband, who was sleeping in another room, all the use was taken away from my limbs and tongue, so that except for seeing and hearing, I could not move a muscle. And the witch, standing between the 2, said, See, this vile woman, who would not take me for her midwife, shall not win through unpunished. The other 2, standing by her, pleaded for me, saying, She has never harmed any of us. But the witch added, Because she has offended me, I am going to put something into her entrails. But to please you, she shall not feel any pain for half a year. But after that time, she shall be tortured enough. So she came up and touched my belly with her hands. And it seemed to me that she took out my entrails and put in something which, however, I could not see. And when they had gone away, and I had recovered my power of speech, I called my husband as soon as possible and told him what had happened. But he put it down to pregnancy and said, You pregnant women are always suffering from fancies and delusions. And when he would by no means believe me, I replied, I have been given 6 months' grace, and if after that time no torment comes to me, I shall believe you. She related this to her son, a cleric who was then archdeacon of the district, and who came to visit her on the same day. And what happened? When exactly 6 months had passed, such a terrible pain came into her belly that she could not help disturbing everybody with her cries day and night. And because, as has been said, she was most devout to the Virgin and Queen of Mercy, she fasted with bread and water every Saturday, so that she believed that she was delivered by her intercession. For one day, when she wanted to perform an action of nature, all those unclean things fell from her body, and she called her husband and son and said, Are those fancies? Did I not say that after half a year the truth would be known? Or who ever saw me eat thorns, bones, and even bits of wood? For there were brambles as long as a palm, as well as a quantity of other things. Moreover, as was said in the first part of the work, it was shown by the confession of the servant who was brought to judgment at Breisach, that the greatest injuries to the faith as regards the heresy of witches are done by midwives, and this is made clearer than daylight itself by the confessions of some who were afterwards burned. For in the diocese of Basel, at the town of Daun, a witch who was burned confessed that she had killed more than 40 children by sticking a needle through the crowns of their heads into their brains as they came out from the womb. Finally, another woman in the diocese of Strasbourg confessed that she had killed more children than she could count, and she was caught in this way. She had been called from one town to another to act as midwife to a certain woman, and having performed her office, was going back home. But as she went out of the town gate, the arm of a newly born child fell out of the cloak she had wrapped around her, in whose folds the arm had been concealed. This was seen by those who were sitting in the gateway, and when she had gone on, they picked up from the ground what they took to be a piece of meat. But when they looked more closely and saw that it was not a piece of meat, but recognized it by its fingers as a child's arm, they reported it to the magistrates, and it was found that a child had died before baptism, lacking an arm. So the witch was taken and questioned, and confessed the crime, and that she had, as has been said, killed more children than she could count. Now the reason for such practices is as follows. It is to be presumed that witches are compelled to do such things at the command of evil spirits, and sometimes against their own wills. For the devil knows that because of the pain of loss or original sin, such children are debarred from entering the kingdom of heaven. And by this means the last judgment is delayed, when the devils will be condemned to eternal torture, since the number of the elect is more slowly completed, on the fulfillment of which the world will be consumed. And also, as has already been shown, witches are taught by the devil to confect from the limbs of such children an unguent which is very useful for their spells. But in order to bring so great a sin into utter detestation, we must not pass over in silence the following horrible crime. For when they do not kill the child, they blasphemously offer it to the devil in this manner. As soon as the child is born, the midwife, if the mother herself is not a witch, carries it out of the room on the pretext of warming it, raises it up, and offers it to the prince of devils, that is Lucifer, and to all the devils, and this is done by the kitchen fire. A certain man relates that he noticed that his wife, when her time came to give birth, against the usual custom of women in childbirth, did not allow any woman to approach the bed except her own daughter, who acted as midwife. Wishing to know the reason for this, he hid himself in the house and saw the whole order of the sacrilege and dedication to the devil, as it has been described. He saw also, as it seemed to him, that without any human support, but by the power of the devil, the child was climbing up the chain by which the cooking pots were suspended. In great consternation, both at the terrible words of the invocation of the devils and at the other iniquitous ceremonies, he strongly insisted that the child should be baptized immediately. While it was being carried to the next village, where there was a church, and when they had to cross a bridge over a certain river, he drew his sword and ran at his daughter, who was carrying the child, saying in the hearing of two others who were with them, "You shall not carry the child over the bridge, for either it must cross the bridge by itself, or you shall be drowned in the river." The daughter was terrified, and together with the other women in the company, asked him if he were in his right mind, for he had hidden what had happened from all the others, except the two men who were with him. Then he answered, "You vile drab, by your magic arts you made the child climb the chain in the kitchen. Now make it cross the bridge with no one carrying it, or I shall drown you in the river." And so, being compelled, she put the child down on the bridge, and invoked the devil by her art, and suddenly the child was seen on the other side of the bridge. And when the child had been baptized, and he had returned home, since he now had witnesses to convict his daughter of witchcraft, for he could not prove the former crime of the oblation to the devil, inasmuch as he had been the only witness of the sacrilegious ritual, he accused both daughter and mother before the judge after the period of purgation, and they were both burned, and the crime of midwives of making that sacrilegious offering was discovered. But here the doubt arises, to what end or purpose is sacrilegious offering of children, and how does it benefit the devils? To this it can be said that the devils do this for three reasons, which serve three most wicked purposes. The first reason arises from their pride, which always increases, as it is said, that they that hate thee have lifted up the head. For they try as far as possible to conform with divine rites and ceremonies. Secondly, they can more easily deceive men under the mask of an outwardly seeming pious action. For in the same way they entice young virgins and boys into their power, for though they might solicit such by means of evil and corrupt men, yet they rather deceive them by magic mirrors and reflections seen in witches' fingernails, and lure them on in the belief that they love chastity, whereas they hate it. For the devil hates above all the Blessed Virgin, because she bruised his head. Just so, in this oblation of children, they deceive the minds of witches into the vice of infidelity, under the appearance of a virtuous act. And the third reason is that the perfidy of witches may grow to the devil's own gain, when they have witches dedicated to them from their very cradles. And this sacrilege affects the child in three ways. In the first place, visible offerings to God are made of visible things, such as wine of bread or the fruits of the earth, as a sign of honor and subjection to him, as it is said in Ecclesiasticus 25, "Thou shalt not appear empty before the Lord," and such offerings cannot and must not afterwards be put to profane uses. Therefore, the Holy Father, St. John Damascene, says, "The oblations which are offered in church belong only to the priests, but not that they should divert them to their own uses, but that they should faithfully distribute them, partly in the observance of divine worship, and partly for the use of the poor. From this it follows that a child who has been offered to the devil in sign of subjection and homage to him cannot possibly be dedicated by Catholics to a holy life and worthy and fruitful service to God for the benefit of himself and others. For who can say that the sins of the mothers and of others do not redound in punishment upon the children? Perhaps someone will quote that saying of the prophet, "The sons shall not bear the iniquity of the father," but there is that other passage in Exodus 20, "I am a jealous God, visiting the sins of the father upon the children until the third and fourth generation." Now the meaning of these two sayings is as follows. The first speaks of spiritual punishment in the judgment of heaven or God, and not in the judgment of men. And this is the punishment of the soul, such as loss or the forfeiture of glory, or the punishment of pain, that is, of the torment of eternal fire. And with such punishment no one is punished except for his own sin, either inherited as original sin or committed as actual sin. The second text speaks of those who imitate the sins of their father. As Gratian has explained, and there IQ 4, etc. And there he gives other explanations as to how the judgment of God inflicts other punishments on a man, not only for his own sins, which he has committed, or which he might commit, but is prevented by punishment from committing, but also for the sins of others. And it cannot be argued that when a man is punished without cause and without sin, which should be the cause of punishment, for according to the rule of law, no one must be punished without sin, unless there is some cause of punishment. And we can say that there is always a most just cause, though it may not be known to us. See St. Augustine, 24, section 4. And if we cannot in the result penetrate the depths of God's judgment, yet we know that what he has said is true, and what he has done is just. But there is this distinction to be observed. In innocent children who are offered to devils, not by their mothers when they are witches, but by midwives, who, as we have said, secretly take from the embrace and the womb of an honest mother, such children are not so cut off from grace that they must necessarily become prone to such crimes, but it is piously to be believed that they may rather cultivate their mother's virtues. The second result to the children of this sacrilege is as follows. When a man offers himself as a sacrifice to God, he recognizes God as his beginning and his end, and this sacrifice is more worthy than all external sacrifices which he makes, having its beginning in his creation and its end in his glorification, as it is said. A sacrifice to God is an afflicted spirit, etc. In the same way, when a witch offers a child to the devils, she commends its body and soul to him as its beginning and its end in eternal damnation. Wherefore, not without some miracle can the child be set free from the payment of so great a debt. And we read often in history of children whom their mothers, in some passion or mental disturbance, have unthinkingly offered to the devil from the very womb, and how it is only with the very greatest difficulty that they can, when they have grown to adult age, be delivered from that bondage which the devil has, with God's permission, usurped to himself. And of this the Book of Examples, most blessed Virgin Mary, affords many illustrations, a notable instance being that of the man whom the Supreme Pontiff was unable to deliver from the torments of the devil, but at last he was sent to a holy man living in the East, and finally, with great difficulty, was delivered from his bondage through the intercession of the most glorious Virgin herself. And if God so severely punishes even such a thoughtless, I will not say sacrifice, but commendation, used angrily by a mother when her husband, after copulating with her, says, "I hope a child will come of it," and she answers, "May the child go to the devil," how much greater must be the punishment when the divine majesty is offended in the way we have described. Chapter 14. Here followeth how witches injure cattle in various ways. When St. Paul said, "Doth God care for oxen?" he meant that, though all things are subject to divine providence, both man and beast each in its degree, as the psalmist says, yet the sons of men are especially in his governments and under the protection of his wings. I say, therefore, if men are injured by witches, with God's permission, both the innocent and just as well as sinners, and if parents are bewitched in their children, as being part of their possessions, who can then presume to doubt that, with God's permission, various injuries can be brought by witches upon cattle and the fruits of the earth, which are also part of men's possessions? For so was Job stricken by the devil and lost all his cattle. So also there is not even the smallest farm where women do not injure each other's cows by drying up their milk and very often killing them. But first let us consider the smallest of these injuries, that of drying up the milk. If it is asked how they can do this, it can be answered that, according to Blessed Albert in his book on animals, milk is naturally menstrual in any animal, and like another flux in women, when it is not stopped by some natural infirmity, it is due to witchcraft that it is stopped. Now the flow of milk is naturally stopped when the animal becomes pregnant, and it is stopped by an accidental infirmity when the animal eats some herb, that the nature of which is to dry up milk and make the cow ill. But they can cause this in various ways by witchcraft. For on the more holy nights, according to the instructions of the devil, and for the greater offense to divine majesty of God, a witch will sit down in a corner of her house with a pail between her legs, stick a knife or some instrument in the wall or a post, and make as if to milk it with her hands. Then she summons her familiar, who always works with her in everything, and tells him that she wishes to milk a certain cow from a certain house, which is healthy and abounding in milk. And suddenly the devil takes the milk from the udder of that cow and brings it to where the witch is sitting, as if it were flowing from the knife. But when this is publicly preached to the people, they get no bad information by it. For however much anyone may invoke the devil, and think that by this alone he can do this thing, he deceives himself, because he is without the foundation of that perfidy, not having rendered homage to the devil or abjured the faith. I have set this down because some have thought that several of the matter of which I have written ought not to be a preacher to the people, on account of the danger of giving them evil knowledge. Whereas it is impossible for anyone to learn from a preacher how to perform any of the things that have been mentioned, but they have been written rather to bring so great a crime into detestation, and should be preached from the pulpit, so that judges may be more eager to punish the horrible crime of abnegation of the faith. Yet they should not always be preached in this way, for the secular mind pays more attention to temporal losses, being more concerned with earthly than spiritual matters. Therefore, when witches can be accused of inflicting temporal loss, judges are more zealous to punish them. But who can fathom the cunning of the devil? I know of some men in a certain city who wished to eat some May butter one May time, and as they were walking along, they came to a meadow, and say down by a stream, and one of them, who had formed some open or tacit pact with the devil, said, I will get you the best May butter. And at once he took off his clothes and went into the stream, not standing up, but sitting with his back against the current. And while the others looked on, he uttered certain words and moved the water with his hands behind his back. And in a short time he brought out a great quantity of butter of the sort that the country women sell in the market in May, and the others tasted it and declared that it was the very best butter. From this we can deduce first the following fact concerning their practices. They are either true witches by reason of an express pact formed with the devil, or they know by some tacit understanding that the devil will do what they ask. In the first case, there is no need for any discussion, for such are true witches. But in the second case, then they owed the devil's help to the fact that they were blasphemously offered to the devil by a midwife or by their own mothers. But it may be objected that the devil perhaps brought the butter without any compact, expressed or tacit, and without any previous dedication to himself. It is answered that no one can ever use the devil's help in such matters without invoking him, and that by that very act of seeking help from the devil, he is an apostate from the faith. This is the decision of St. Thomas in the second book of Sentences, section 8, on the question whether it is apostasy from the faith to use the devil's help. And although the blessed Albert the Great agrees with the other doctors, yet he says more expressly that in such matters there is always apostasy, either in word or in deed. For if invocations, conjurations, fumigations, and adorations are used, then an open pact is formed with the devil, even if there has been no surrender of body and soul together with explicit abjuration of the faith, either wholly or in part. For by the mere invocation of the devil a man commits open verbal apostasy. But if there is no spoken invocation, but only a bare action from which follows something that could not be done without the devil's help, then whether a man does it be beginning in the name of the devil, or with some other unknown words, or without any words but with that intention, then says blessed Albert, it is apostasy of deed, because that action is looked for from the devil. But since to expect or receive anything from the devil is always a disparagement of the faith, it is also apostasy. So it is concluded that by whatever means that sorcerer procured the butter, it was done with either a tacit or an express pact with the devil, and since, if it had been with an express pact, he would have behaved after the usual manner of witches. It is probably that there was a tacit or secret pact originating either from himself or from his mother or a midwife, and I say that it arose from himself, since he only went through certain motions and expected the devil to produce the effect. The second conclusion we can draw from this and similar practices is this: the devil cannot create new species of things. Therefore, when natural butter suddenly came out of the water, the devil did not do this by changing the water into milk, but by taking butter from some place where it was kept and bringing it to the man's hand. Or else he took natural milk from a natural cow and suddenly churned it into natural butter. For while the art of woman takes a little time to make butter, the devil could do it in the shortest space of time and bring it to the man. It is the same way that certain dealers in magic, when they find themselves in need of wine or some such necessity, merely go out in the night with a flask or vessel and bring it back suddenly filled with wine. For then the devil takes natural wine from the vessel and fills their flasks for them. And with regard to the manner whereby witches kill animals and cattle, it should be said that they act very much as they do in the case of men. They can bewitch them by a touch and a look, or by a look only, or by placing under the threshold of the stable door, or near the place where they go to water, some charm or periapt of witchcraft. For in this way, those witches who were burned at Ratisbon, of whom we shall say more later on, were always incited by the devil to bewitch the best horses and the fattest cattle, and when they were asked how they did so, one of them, named Agnes, said that they hid certain things under the threshold of the stable door. And asked what sort of things, she said, the bones of different kinds of animals. She was further asked in whose name they did this, and answered, in the name of the devil and all the other devils. And there was another of them, named Anna, who had killed 23 horses in succession, belonging to one of the citizens who was a carrier. This man, at last, when he had bought his 24th horse, and reduced to extreme poverty, stood in his stable and said to the witch, who was standing in the door of her house, "See, I have bought a horse, and I swear to God and his holy mother, that if this horse dies, I shall kill you with my own hands." And at that the witch was frightened, and left the horse alone. But when she was taken and asked how she had done these things, she answered that she had done nothing but dig a little hole after which the devil had put in it certain things unknown to her. From this it is concluded that the witch cooperates sufficiently, if it is only by a touch or look. For the devil is permitted no power of injuring creatures without some cooperation on the part of the witch, as has been shown before, and this is for the great offense to the divine majesty. For shepherds have often seen animals in the fields give 3 or 4 jumps into the air, and then suddenly fall to the ground and die, and this is caused by the power of witches at the instance of the devil. In the diocese of Strasbourg, between the town of Füssen and Mount Ferrer, a certain very rich man affirmed that more than 40 oxen and cows belonging to him and others had been bewitched in the Alps within the space of 1 year, and that there had been no natural plague or sickness to cause it. To prove this, he said that when cattle die from some chance plague or disease, they do not do so all at once, but by degrees, but that this witchcraft had suddenly taken all the strength from them, and therefore everyone judged that they had been killed by witchcraft. I have said 40 head of cattle, but I believe he put the number higher than that. However, it is very true that many cattle are said to have been bewitched in some districts, especially in the Alps, and it is known that this form of witchcraft, if unhappily most widespread. We shall consider some similar cases later in the chapter where we discuss the remedies for cattle that have been bewitched. Chapter 15. How they raise and stir up hailstorms and tempests, and cause lightning to blast both men and beasts. That devils and their disciples can by witchcraft cause lightnings and hailstorms and tempests, and that the devils have power from God to do this, and their disciples do so with God's permission, is proved by Holy Scripture in Job 1 and 2. For the devil received power from God, and immediately caused it to happen that the Sabians took away from Job 50 yoke of oxen and 500 asses, and then fire came from heaven and consumed 7,000 camels, and a great wind came and smote down his house, killing his 7 sons and his 3 daughters, and all the young men, that is to say, the servants, except him who brought the news, were killed. And finally, the devil smote the body of the holy man with the most terrible sores, and caused his wife and his 3 friends to vex him grievously. St. Thomas, in his commentary on Job, says that as follows: It must be confessed that with God's permission, the devils can disturb the air, raise up winds, and make the fire fall from heaven. For although in the matter of taking various shapes, corporeal nature is not at the command of any angel, either good or bad, but only at that of God, the Creator. Yet in the matter of local motion, corporeal nature has to obey the spiritual nature. And this truth is clearly exemplified in man himself. For at the mere command of the will, which exists subjectively in the soul, the limbs are moved to perform that which they have been willed to do. Therefore, whatever can be accomplished by mere local motion, this not only good but bad spirits can, by their natural power, accomplish, unless God should forbid it. But winds and rain and other similar disturbances of the air can be caused by the mere movement of vapors, released from the earth or the water. Therefore the natural power of devils is sufficient to cause such things. So says St. Thomas. For God in his justice, using the devils as his agents of punishment, inflicts the evils which come to us who live in this world. Therefore, with reference to that in the Psalms, he called a famine on the land and wasted all their substance of bread. The gloss says, God allowed this evil to be caused by the bad angels, who are in charge of such matters, and by famine is meant the angel in charge of famine. We refer the reader also to what has been written above on the question as to whether witches must always have the devil's help to aid them in their works, and concerning the 3 kinds of harm which the devils at times inflict without agency of a witch. But the devils are more eager to injure men with the help of a witch, since in this way God is the more offended, and greater power is given to them to torment and punish. And relevant to this subject is what the doctors have written in the 2nd book of Sentences, section 6, on the question whether there is a special place assigned to the bad angels in the clouds of the air. For in the devils there are 3 things to be considered: their nature, their duty, and their sin. And by nature they belong to the empyrean of heaven, through sin to the lower hell, but by reason of the duty assigned to them, as we have said, as ministers of punishment to the wicked and trial to the good. Their place is in the clouds of the air, for they do not dwell here with us on the earth, lest they should plague us too much. But in the air and around the fiery sphere, they can so bring together the active and passive agents that, when God permits, they can bring down fire and lightning from heaven. A story is told in the Formicarius of a certain man who had been taken and was asked by the judge how they went about to raise up hailstorms and tempests, and whether it was easy for them to do so. He answered, "We can easily cause hailstorms, but we cannot do all the harm that we wish, because of the guardianship of good angels." And he added, "We can only injure those who are deprived of God's help, but we cannot hurt those who make the sign of the cross." And this is how we got to work. First, we used certain words in the fields to implore the chief of the devils to send one of his servants to strike the man whom we name. Then, when the devil has come, we sacrifice to him a black cock at 2 crossroads, throwing it up into the air. And when the devil has received this, he performs our wish and stirs up the air, but not always in the places where we have named, and, according to the permission of the living God, sends down hailstorms and lightnings. In the same work, we hear of a certain leader, or heresiarch, of witches, named Stauffer, who lived in Bern in the adjacent country, and used publicly to boast that, whenever he liked, he could change himself into a mouse in the sight of his rivals and slip through the hands of his deadly enemies, and that he had often escaped from the hands of his mortal foes in this manner. But when the divine justice wished to put an end to his wickedness, some of his enemies lay in wait for him cautiously, and saw him sitting in a basket near a window, and suddenly pierced him through with swords and spear, so that he miserably died for his crimes. Yet he left behind him a disciple named Hoppo, who had also for his master that Stodlin whom we have mentioned before in the 6th chapter. These two could, whenever they pleased, cause the third part of the manure or straw or corn to pass invisibly from a neighbor's field to their own. They could raise the most violent hailstorms and destructive winds and lightning, could cast into the water into the sight of their parents' children walking by the waterside, when there was no one else in sight, could cause barrenness in men and animals, could reveal hidden things to others, could in many ways injure men in their affairs or their bodies, could at times kill whom they would by lightning, and could cause many other plagues, when and where the justice of God permitted such things to be done. It is better to add an instance which came within our own experience, for in the diocese of Constance, 28 German miles from the town of Ratisbon, in the direction of Salzburg, a violent hailstorm destroyed all the fruit crops and vineyards in a belt 1 mile wide, so that the vines hardly bore fruit for 3 years. This was brought to the notice of the Inquisition, since the people clamored for an inquiry to be held, many beside all the townsmen being of the opinion that it was caused by witchcraft. Accordingly, it was agreed after 15 days' formal deliberation that it was a case of witchcraft for us to consider, and among a large number of suspects, we particularly examined 2 women, one named Agnes, a bathwoman, and the other Anna von Mindelheim. These 2 were taken and shut up separately in different prisons, neither of them knowing in the least what had happened to the other. On the following day, the bathwoman was very gently questioned in the presence of a notary by the chief magistrate, a justice named Geller, very zealous for the faith, and by the other magistrates with him. And although she was undoubtedly well provided with that evil gift of silence which is the constant bane of judges, and at the first trial affirmed that she was innocent of any crime against man or woman, yet in divine mercy that so great a crime should not pass unpunished, suddenly, when she had been freed from her chains, although it was in the torture chamber, she fully laid bare all the crimes which she had committed. For when she was questioned by the notary of the Inquisition upon the accusations which had been brought against her of harm done to men and cattle, by reason of which she had been gravely suspected of being a witch, although there had been no witness to prove that she had abjured the faith or performed coitus with an incubus devil, for she had been most secret, nevertheless, after she had confessed to harm which she had caused to animals and men, she acknowledged also all that she was asked concerning the abjuration of the faith, and copulation committed with an incubus devil, saying that for more than 18 years she had given her body to an incubus devil with a complete abnegation of the faith. After this she was asked whether she knew anything about the hailstorm which we have mentioned, and answered that she did, and being asked how and in what way, she answered, I was in my house, and at midday a familiar came to me, and told me to go with a little water onto the field or plain of Couple, for so it is named. And when I asked what he wanted to do with the water, he said that he wanted to make it rain. So I went out at the town gate, and found the devil standing under a tree. The judge asked her, under which tree? And she said, under that one opposite that tower, pointing it out. Asked what she did under the tree, she said, the devil told me to dig a hole and pour the water into it. Asked whether they sat down together, she said, I sat down, but the devil stood up. Then she was, with what words and what manner she had stirred the water. And she answered, I stirred it with my finger, and called on the name of the devil himself and all the other devils. Again, the judge asked what was done with the water, and she answered, it disappeared, and the devil took it up into the air. Then she was asked if she had any associate, and answered, under another tree opposite I had a companion, naming the other captive witch Anna von Mindelheim. But I do not know what she did. Finally, the bath woman was asked how long it was between the taking up of the water in the hailstorm, and she answered, there was just sufficient interval of time to allow me to get back to my house. But, and this is remarkable, when on the next day the other witch had at first been exposed to the very gentlest questions, being suspended hardly clear of the ground by her thumbs, after she had been set quite free, she disclosed the whole matter without the slightest discrepancy from what the other had told, agreeing as to the place that it was under such a tree, and the other had been under another. As to the method, namely of stirring water poured into a hole, in the name of the devil and all the devils, and as to the interval of time, that the hailstorm had come after her devil had taken the water up into the air, and she had returned home. Accordingly, on the third day, they were burned. And the bath woman was contrite and confessed, and commended herself to God, saying that she would die with a willing heart if she could escape the tortures of the devil, and held in her hand a cross which she kissed. But the other witch scorned her for doing so, and this one had consorted with an incubus devil for more than 20 years, with a complete abjuration of the faith, and had done far more harm than the former witch to men, cattle, and the fruits of the earth, as is shown in the preserved record of their trial. These instances must serve, since indeed countless examples of this sort of mischief could be recounted. But very often men and beasts in storehouses are struck by lightning, by the power of devils, and the cause of this seems to be more hidden and ambiguous, since it often appears to happen by divine permission without the cooperation of any witch. However, it has been found that witches have freely confessed that they have done such things, and there are various instances of it which could be mentioned, in addition to what has already been said. Therefore, it is reasonable to conclude that, just as easily as they raise hailstorms, so can they cause lightning and storms at sea, and so no doubt at all remains on these points. I think we're getting there. Almost done with this question. Chapter 16. Of 3 ways in which men and women may be discovered to be addicted to witchcraft, divided into 3 heads, and first of the witchcraft of archers. For our present purpose, the last class of witchcraft is that which is practiced in 3 forms by men. And first we must consider the 7 deadly and horrible crimes which are committed by wizards who are archers. For first, on the sacred day of the Passion of our Lord, that is to say, on Good Friday, as it is called, during the solemnization of the Mass of the pre-sanctified, they shoot with arrows, as at targets, at the most sacred image of the crucifix. Oh, the cruelty and injury to the Savior! Secondly, Though there is some doubt whether they have to utter a verbal form of apostasy to the devil in addition to that apostasy of deed, yet whether it be so or not, no greater injury to the faith can be done by a Christian. For it is certain that, if such things were done by an infidel, they would be of no efficacy, for no such easy method of gratifying their hostility to the faith is granted to them. Therefore, these wretches ought to consider the truth and power of the Catholic faith, for the confirmation of which God justly permits such crimes. Thirdly, such an archer has to shoot 3 or 4 arrows in this way, and as a consequence, he is able to kill on any day just the same number of men. Fourthly, they have the following assurance from the devil, that though they must first actually set eyes on the man they wish to kill, and must bend their whole will on killing him, yet it matter not where the man may shut himself up, for he cannot be protected, but the arrows which have been shot will be carried and struck into him by the devil. Fifthly, they can shoot an arrow with such precision as to shoot a penny from a person's head without hurting his head, and they can continue to do this indefinitely. Sixthly, in order to gain this power, they have to offer homage of body and soul to the devil. We shall give some instances of this sort of practice. For a certain prince of the Rhineland, named Eberhard Longbeard, because he let his beard grow, had, before he was 60 years old, acquired for himself some of the imperial territory, and was besieging a certain castle named Lindenbrunnen, because of the raids which were made by the men of the castle. And he had in his company a wizard of this sort, named Punker, who so molested the men of the castle that he killed them all in succession with his arrows, except one. And this is how he proceeded. Whenever he had looked at a man, it did not matter where that man went to or hid himself. He had only to loose an arrow, and that man was mortally wounded and killed. And he was able to shoot 3 such arrows every day, because he had shot 3 arrows at the image of the Savior. It is probable that the devil favors the number 3 more than any other, because it represents an effective denial of the Holy Trinity. But after he had shot those 3 arrows, he could only shoot with the same uncertainty as other men. At last, one of the men of the castle called out to him mockingly, "Punker, will you not at least spare the ring which hangs in the gate?" And he answered from outside in the night, "No, I shall take it away on the day that the castle is captured." And he fulfilled his promise, for when, as has been said, all were killed except one, and the castle had been taken, he took that ring and hung it in his own house at Rohrbach in Diocese of Worms, where it can be seen hanging to this day. But afterwards he was one night killed with their spades by some peasants whom he had injured, and he perished in his sins. It is told also of this man that a very eminent person wished to have proof of his skill, and for a test placed his little son before the target with a penny on his cap, and ordered him to shoot the penny away without removing the cap. The wizard said that he would do it, but with reluctance, not being sure whether the devil was seducing him to his death. But yielding to the persuasions of the prince, he placed 1 arrow in readiness in the cord, which was slung over his shoulder, fitted another to his bow, and shot the penny from the cap without hurting the boy. Seeing this, the prince asked him why he had placed an arrow in the cord, and he answered, "If I had been deceived by the devil, and had killed my son, since I should have had to die, I would quickly have shot you with the other arrow to avenge my death." And though such wickedness is permitted by God for the proving and chastisement of the faithful, nevertheless, more powerful miracles are performed by the Saviour's mercy for the strengthening and glory of the faith. For in the Diocese of Constance, near the castle of Hohenzollern, in a convent of nuns, there is a newly built church where may be seen an image of our Savior, pierced with an arrow and bleeding. And the truth of this miracle is shown as follows. A miserable wretch, who wished to be assured by the devil of having 3 or 4 arrows with which he could, in manner we have told, kill whom he pleased, shot and pierced with an arrow, just as it is still seen, a certain crucifix at a crossroad. And when it miraculously began to bleed, The wretch was stuck motionless in his steps by divine power. And when he was asked by a passer-by why he stood fixed there, he shook his head, and trembling in his arms and his hands, in which he held the bow, and all over his body, could answer nothing. So the other looked about him, and saw the crucifix with the arrow and the blood, and said, "You villain, you have pierced the image of our Lord." And calling some others, he told them to see that he did not escape, although, as has been said, he could not move, and ran to the castle and told what had happened. And they came down and found the wretched man in the same place. And when they had questioned him, and he had confessed his crime, he was removed from that district by public justice, and suffered a miserable death, and merited expiation of his deeds. But alas, how horrible it is to think that human perversity is not afraid to countenance such crimes. For it is said that in the halls of the great such men are maintained to glory in their crimes and open contempt of the faith, to the heavy offense of divine majesty, and in scorn of our Redeemer, and are permitted to boast of their deeds. Wherefore such protectors, defenders, and patrons are to be judged, not only heretics, but even apostates from the faith, and are to be punished in the manner that will be told. And this is the seventh deadly sin of these wizards. For first, they are by very law excommunicated, and if the patrons or clerics, they are degraded and deprived of all office and benefit, nor can they be restored except by a special indulgence from the apostolic see. Also, if after their proscription such protectors remain obstinate in their excommunication for the period of a year, they are to be condemned as heretics. This is in accordance with the canon law, for in Book 6 it touches on the question of direct or indirect interference with the proceedings of diocesanes and inquisitors in the cause of the faith, and mentions the aforesaid punishment to be inflicted after a year. For it say, "We forbid any interference from potentates, temporal lords, and rulers, and their officials," etc. Anyone may refer to the chapter. And further, that witches and their protectors are by very law to be excommunicated is shown in the canon of the suppressing of the heresy of witchcraft, especially where it says, "We excommunicate and anathematize all heretics, catharsists, sectaries, and others, by whatever name they are known." And with these it includes all their sympathizers and protectors, and others, saying later on, "Also, we excommunicate all followers, protectors, defenders, and patrons of such heretics." The canon law prescribes various penalties which are incurred within the space of a year by such heretics, whether laymen or clerics, where it says, "We place under the ban of excommunication all their protectors, patrons, and defenders, so that when any such has been so sentenced, and has scorned to recant his heresy, within a year from that time he shall be considered an outlaw, and shall not be admitted to any office or council, nor be able to vote in the election of such officers, nor be allowed free opportunity of giving evidence. He shall not succeed to any inheritance, and no one shall be held responsible for any business transaction with him. If he be a judge, his judgment shall not stand, nor shall any case be brought to his hearing. If he be an advocate, he shall not be allowed to plead. If he be a notary, no instrument drawn up by him shall have any weight, but is to be condemned together with its condemned author. And similar penalties are decreed for the holders of other offices. But if he be a cleric, he is to be degraded from all office and benefice, for his guilt being the greater, it is more heavily avenged. And if any such, after they have been marked down by the church, contemptuously try to ignore their punishment, the sentence of excommunication is to be rigorously applied to them, to the extreme limits of vengeance. And the clergy shall not administer the sacraments of the church to such heretics, nor presume to give them Christian burial, nor accept their alms and oblations, on pain of being deprived of their office, to which they can in no way be restored without a special indulgence from the apostolic see. There are, finally, many other penalties incurred by such heretics even when they do not persist in their obstinacy for a year, and also by their children and grandchildren, For they can be degraded by a bishop or by an inquisitor, declared deprived of all titles, possessions, honors, and ecclesiastical benefits, in fine, of all public offices whatsoever. But this is only when they are persistently and obstinately impenitent. Also, their sons to the second generation may be disqualified and unable to attain either ecclesiastical preferment or public office. But this is to be understood only of the descendants on the father's side, and not on the mother's, and only of those who are impenitent. Also, all their followers, protectors, faulters, and patrons shall be denied all right of petition or appeal. And this is explained as meaning that after a verdict has been returned that they are such heretics, then can they make no appeal before their sentence, however much they may have been in any respect ill-used or treated with undue severity. Much more could be adduced in support of our standpoint, but this is sufficient. Now, for the better understanding of what has been said, some few points are to be discussed. And first, if a prince or secular potentate employs such a wizard as we have described for the destruction of some castle in a just war, and with his help crushes the tyranny of wicked men, is his whole army to be considered as protectors and patrons of that wizard, and to be subjected to the penalties we have mentioned? The answer seems to be that the rigor of justice must be tempered on account of their numbers, for the leader, with his counselors and advisers, must be considered to have aided and abetted such witchcraft. And they are by law implicated in the aforesaid penalties, when after being warned by their spiritual advisers, they have persisted in their bad course. And then they are to be judged protectors and patrons, and are to be punished. But the rest of the army, since they have no part in their leader's counsel, but are simply prepared to risk their lives in defense of their country, although they may view with approval the feats of the wizard, nevertheless escape the sentence of excommunication. But they must in their confession acknowledge the guilt of the wizard, and in their absolution by the confessor must receive a solemn warning to hold all such practices forever in detestation, and as far as they are able to drive from their land all such wizards. It may be asked, by whom such princes are to be absolved when they come to their senses, whether by their own spiritual advisers or by their inquisitors? We answer that, if they repent, they may be absolved either by their spiritual advisers or by their inquisitors. This is provided in the canon law concerning the proceedings to be taken in the fear of God, and as a warning to men against heretics, their followers, protectors, patrons, and faulters, as also against those who are accused or suspected of heresy. But if any of the above, forswearing his former lapse into heresy, wish to return to the unity of the church, he may receive the benefit of absolution provided by Holy Church. A prince or any other may be said to have returned to his senses when he has delivered up the wizard to be punished for his offenses against the Creator, when he has banished from his dominions all who have been found guilty of witchcraft or heresy, when he is truly penitent for the past, and when, as becomes a Catholic prince, he is firmly determined in his mind not to show any favor to any other such wizard. That is the end of question 1. Hey Sabo, thanks for stopping by. We're gonna end the reading there for today. Just quick programming note. Times will be changing because my schedule at work will be changing. So I'll be probably putting a post down in Twitch with schedule. I don't know how stable work's going to be. I'll be right back, and then we're going to play some games. Yay. I'll figure out what I'm going to play in a minute.